Well, hey, everybody, good to see you today. So glad you're with us in service. A big God bless you to you. You know, I'm so thankful for a place that gives you some space to be able to just get away from all the busyness and the emails and the pressure and life, and to come and to be able to bow down before God and to posture your heart in a way that God can come close to you. And I really believe that at the end of this service today, that the Lord is going to visit this service in one of the most amazing, beautiful ways. And so I just want you to prepare your heart for that. But I want to first of all say a big hello to our church online family and all of our men and women. Over 150,000 of you joining us in correctional facilities around America. Come on, everybody. Would you give them the greatest welcome? Would you let them know it's so good to have you with us today in service? Come on, everyone. Woohoo! Right on. Well, hey, do me a favor. Why don't you pull up your message notes you can find on your Life Fellowship app, and you can follow along with the service and email that to you yourself a little bit later on. And I want to just begin this message off by asking you if you've ever been through something really difficult in your life, that you knew that God could, should, and would do something, but He actually doesn't. And when He doesn't do the thing that you were hoping that He does, you find yourself in all kinds of confusion in your life. And if you've ever been there before, I think that this message, this series, is actually going to be very relevant to your life. In fact, if you're new around here today, maybe this is your first Sunday ever or in a while, maybe you haven't been a part of the previous messages, we're concluding our series studying through the Old Testament book of Habakkuk. And so let me kind of bring us all up to speed so that we can move forward together. We've been studying, of course, through the book of Habakkuk. He is one of 12 minor prophets, and the book was actually written around 600 BC. Now, here's what's so different about Habakkuk's book, and that's this. All the other minor prophets represents God's message to the people, but yet Habakkuk represents the people's message to God. And the reason why that is because God shows up one day and tells Habakkuk, hey man, I am actually really frustrated with the people because my people have become increasingly wicked, vile, violent, very ungodly. So I'm going to need to punish them so that seed doesn't transfer on to other generations. To which Habakkuk would have said, yeah, God, that's right. You are good, you are right for dealing with the people. And then God, though, throws a twist in the plot. He says, I'm actually going to take a nation that you hate. It's the Babylonians. And they're way more wicked, way more vile, way more ungodly, way more violent than you ever have been. And I'm going to use them to destroy Israel, which would have wigged Habakkuk out. He would have said, God, wait a second, wait. That just doesn't seem fair. And if you've ever had a moment that you've looked up to God, circumstances, things that have happened, and you say, God, I don't get this, I'm confused, I'm struggling, then I think you're going to really be able to relate to today's message. So every week I have shown you this chart. It comes from a secular author. His name is Seth Godin. He's written a number of different books. I'm using his chart differently than how he intended it to be used. But let me just quickly go over this again so we're all on the same page. So this chart represents your life. And before you surrender your life to God, we all start out at the very bottom. We all start at a place that we are distant from God, carrying our own shame, our own guilt. But there was a moment that happened in your life that you begin to feel the tug of the Spirit of God, and you finally surrendered to Him. And when that happened, you were born anew on the inside. And the minute that happened, suddenly, it's like you got put onto a rocket ship. It's like there's this spiritual adrenaline rush that happens in your life. You start praying, God answers all your prayers. You start having all these God coincidences happen all the time, and life is good. You're encountering the grace of God. How many of you have ever experienced that moment there in your life? Come on, put your hand up, just kind of wave it at me. Yeah, put your hand in the air and wave like you just don't. There. What happens, though, is that there comes a moment in your Christian journey that you actually hit this hump. That you wake up one day and you pray and God doesn't answer your prayer. So you pray, God, I'm needing you to do this, and it doesn't happen. So you're like, wait a second, God, wait. I thought we had a deal going on. I thought the deal was that I could pray for what I want and you're going to do exactly what I say. Right? Kind of like a spiritual Santa Claus. And so you pray or something happens to your loved one. Or you pray for them and the miracle doesn't happen. And now all of a sudden you have all these questions, this confusion, this struggle going on the inside. Henry Blackaby calls this a crisis of belief. Where you say, God, I was trusting you. But now what I see with my eyes does not match with what I believe in my heart about you. And so maybe you aren't good. Maybe I can't trust you. And whenever that happens, there are two common reactions that most every person goes through. It's either one of two by and large. Number one, people either try to chase their last spiritual high. So they actually try to run back to a time when faith was easy and they try to do the things that they used to do back, but the simple things. And people will change churches and cities and towns and they'll chase ministries. They'll do all kinds of things to chase a spiritual high because it was easy. Or they get angry at God. They just think, you know what? Maybe you aren't good. Maybe I can't trust you. So forget you, God. And so if week number one, chapter number one is all about the questions that we struggle with in our life with God, and if chapter 2 is all about waiting on the promises to be fulfilled, the third chapter of Habakkuk is all about worshiping, even when things don't get better. And what Habakkuk is going to discover, he's going to discover how to worship God even though things don't seem to be getting better. And he is going to develop what I call a chapter 3 level faith. In fact, I think that principle is lived out in this quote. It's a great quote. It says this: I asked for strength. God gave me difficulties to make me strong. I asked for wisdom. God gave me problems to solve. I asked for courage. God gave me dangers to overcome. I asked for love, and God gave me troubled people to help. And my prayers were answered. You see, a lot of people want this intimate, deep relationship with God that is so close, so real, so life-giving. But what we fail to understand is that so oftentimes God will lovingly allow you to go through unanswered questions, unanswered prayers, difficulties, struggles, circumstances. He'll allow you to go through the dip because he knows that when you walk through the dip of life, that is the moment that actually creates chapter number 3 level kind of faith. And so now that we're kind of all up to the same speed, let's jump into chapter number trace. You ready? Let's do it. Habakkuk chapter 3 verse 1, it says, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on what? Yeah, that's what I thought. You're like, some of y'all thinking, man, it sounds like getting jiggy with it. No. Shiganoff. Okay, I know. It's a weird word, Here's what it means. It's actually a musical setting. It's an instruction that you're supposed to sing something, you're supposed to read something, you're supposed to say something with all kinds of passion and fervency and feeling behind it. And so I want you to feel with the passion what Habakkuk says here. On the Shiganoth, Lord, I have heard of your fame, and I stand in awe of your deeds. Oh, Lord. And then what does he say here? Come on, everybody. He says, renew them in our day, in our time, and make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. Remember mercy. He's saying, God, I remember. I have heard of your miracles. I've heard of your power, your glory. But you're not doing it in our lives anymore. And if I could be very honest with you today, I have had seasons in my life where the presence of God has been so unbelievable. I've had times with the Lord where when I've prayed, I've known exactly where he has been standing in my room. I've had seasons where the power of God has been so demonstrated. I mean, I've seen miracles that would boggle your mind happen right in front of my very eyes. I mean, times where God's power is doing such incredible things that I'm doing everything just to hold on to the move of God. But then there's also been so many seasons in my life that I wake up and I'm like, God, where are you? God, I need you to renew those things again in my day. I'm asking you, do it again. Do it again. In fact, that word renew in the Hebrew language is the word kaya. Come on, everybody. Why don't you look at your neighbor and say, Danielson? Come on, look at your neighbor and say, Danielson? Kaya. But just don't hit them, all right? And here's what it means. It means to renew, to revive, to restore. Like, God, I remember when you did these things, and I'm asking you, do it again. Like, I need you to do that again. What do you do when you're in the dip? What do you do when you're struggling with all the circumstances and the dilemmas and the questions and the confusion? How do you move out of the dip and move forward instead of just going back to the same old, same old? How do you do that? Habakkuk comes along and he gives us actually 3 things that we're going to do. And here's the first thing, and that's this. We're going to look back and we're going to remember what God has done. Because your remembrance of things shapes how you move forward. We're going to remember. And this is exactly what Habakkuk does. He begins to focus on some very visible and tangible things in his life, and he's able to be reminded of what God has done. Because you would need to know this, that things can actually trigger spiritual memories. So I brought a little list with me today of a couple things that could trigger your memory. One of them is smells. I don't know if you guys are kind of like me. There's a certain perfume that my wife Tatum puts on. That when she puts that on, I remember back 27 years ago when we first started dating, and I just want to start singing. Oh. Man, I just think it, man. Come on, everybody, sing it with me. By the shadow that's by your side. Come on, sing it. Oh, yeah. I'll sing, whatever, okay. All right, we're done. Yeah, okay. I don't know what it is for you, but like there's just different scents that trigger different memories. So like for me, whenever I smell apple pie, I think about my grandma. And some of you are thinking, no, I think of mothballs. That's what I think, And how about songs? For me, whenever I hear, and this is going to date me, but Van Halen's Jump, man, come on, somebody. I am strapping on my roller skates. I'm going to hang with my friends. We're going to go skate at the roller skating rink. Come on, everybody. Woo! Y'all remember those big old salty pickles they used to have in that big jar, 50 cents? Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, all right. Come on, everybody. Welcome to church today. Yeah. Events can trigger memories. People. How about this one? How about places? In fact, you would need to know that it was a place that triggered Habakkuk's memory. It was a place that was called Teman. And I want you to see this here. Here's what he says. Verse number 3, he says, God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. And Selah here, it just simply means exclamation point. His glory covered the heavens and his praise filled the earth. And you may be wondering today, what's the big deal with this little town, this place, this location called Teman? Like, what's up with that? Well, it probably doesn't mean anything to you. In fact, it probably doesn't at all. But it would have meant a great deal to the Israelites. Because to them, that was the place after God delivered them out of Egypt. And after they passed through the sea, God brought them to a place called Teman. And this is where God promised that he would adopt them, that he would make them his own. And so Habakkuk is remembering the goodness, the faithfulness, the character of God. In fact, this is what he says here in verse 4. It says that God's splendor was like the sunrise. His rays flashed from his hands where his power was hidden. Plague went before him. Pestilence followed his steps. He stood and he shook the earth. And he looked. And I really like that there. He just looked. My mama had that look to her. My mom, she could just look at me. Whenever I was in church and I was misbehaving, boy, I'd be goofing around with my friends and I'd look up and I don't know how mom knew it, but she had these laser eyes just right on me the whole time. And I just telling you, my legs trembled. Like he looked and he made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled and the age-old hills collapsed. His ways are eternal. And then what Habakkuk does, and you can study this for yourself, in verses 7 through 15, he starts remembering how God displayed his glory throughout all of creation, throughout all of nature. And I can just imagine Habakkuk just declaring it, just saying, God, I remember when you split the Red Sea and we walked over on dry ground. And I remember when you fed us with bread in the wilderness miraculously. And I remember when you shook the earth and the walls came tumbling down. I remember when you used pestilence and plagues to defeat the enemy. God, I know what you're capable of. God, I remember. And here's what I need you to understand today. What you need to understand is whenever you're in the dip, whenever you're going through the calamities and the confusion, don't let what you see in the present make you forget what God has done in your past. A lot of times we get so preoccupied by what's happening all around us and we get so distracted by this instead of looking back and remembering how good your God has been to you in your past. And for some of us that are here today, it's time that you look back. It's time that you start remembering that God has never left you, never forsaken you, never abandoned you. He has always been with you. Like I remember when I was in high school, my life was jacked up. I remember it was 1992 in December. I walked down into my basement. I got onto my knees, and I encountered God. I said, God, if you change my life, I'll be the best follower that you've ever had. And I knelt down one person, and I stood up a completely different person. And I remember when I first went off to Bible college that there was a guy that came up to me. He said, young man, the gift of God is on your life. And he went ahead and paid for half of my school bill. The whole thing, half. I remember when God did the miracle of all miracles. And he brought me my wife, Tatum. Hallelujah. He really did. And she's not only my best friend in the whole world, we laugh so much together. I mean, she's my spiritual partner, and together we've had 2 incredible kids. I remember when we first started off in ministry together. I remember there was a time that we didn't know how we would have food to eat the very next day. I remember we prayed together and we said, God, we need you to perform a miracle because we have nothing to eat tomorrow. And the next day in the mail came a check that paid all of our bills and put food on the table. And I remember when we were looking for a place to build this church. We had found land on 121. It was bank foreclosed in Allen. It was right next to the AMC movie theater. An incredible deal, 10 acres, right next to the Lifetime Fitness. So we had put it underneath contract, and I just needed now permission from the city to be able to build. So I sat down with the city planner. And as I'm telling him what we're wanting to do, I'll never forget him leaning forward after about 15 minutes. He just said, young man, you can just stop. He said, I'm just going to tell you. My entire department will fight you on this. You will never build a church on 121. Hey, everybody, check out where our church is at. Come on, somebody. And this is just the first one. We got something going on in Anna right now. We're praying about what God's doing after that. And I'm just telling you, everybody, that I look back and I remember. I'll never forget when I was asked to come to the hospital because there was a young lady that the doctors had given 24 hours to live. Just 24. They asked me to come on in and to pray over her. All the family was coming in to give their last goodbyes. And I prayed with the family that was there, and we asked that God would do a miracle. And if I'm lying, I'm dying, everybody. 4 days later, that young lady was walking out of the hospital, and I remember. Sometimes, in order for us to move into the preferred future that God has for us, we have to remember what God has done in the past. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, man, Chris, I've never had anything like that happen in my life at all, not even close. Well, it doesn't have to be that dramatic. You know, maybe for you, let me just say this, that if you are a Christ follower, you've been walking with God for any period amount of time, there's probably been, if you'll just stop and ask God, I promise you that He will remind you of what He has done in your life. You'll remember the day that, my goodness, you were struggling and somebody invited you to church. Maybe you showed up to church and it just seemed like there was not another single person there. It was just you and God, and it was like every word that was spoken was just for you. And you remember. Or maybe there was that time that you were really hurting. And that certain song came on, and when it did, God used it to minister so deeply on the inside of you. And you remember that God was with you. Or maybe you were filled with all kinds of confusion. Maybe you were struggling. Maybe you were in the dip of life. And there was that certain person that came your way that just said, hey, can I pray for you? And God used them to do something incredible. Let me just tell you something. Habakkuk comes along and says, one of the first things that you need to do, that when you are in the moments of difficulty in your life, you need to stop and think and remember that God was with you. Here's the second thing, and that's this. You have to accept what God is doing. So this doesn't mean that we roll over and play dead and stop believing for a miracle. It just means that you have to acknowledge the struggle. You have to accept what God is doing, even if you don't like it. Here's the tragedy in my mind. Unfortunately, we have too many what I call hits Christians. H-I-T-S. hits Christians. You got your head in the sand. Bunch of them. You're just constantly denying reality. So for instance, maybe the doctor comes to you and says, hey, you're going to really need to change your eating habits. You're going to need to start making sure that you start taking care of your body, or it's not going to be good for you. And we completely ignore the doctor when you stick our head in the sand. Or maybe your marriage is going through some difficulty and your spouse says, hey, let's go get marriage counseling, and you dismiss the whole thing. You just stick your head in the sand. Or maybe your finances are really, 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 really bad, and yet you say, man, I just want the house. I got to have the house. I'm going to have that house. By faith, we're going to step out and buy the house, and you just stick your head in the sand. Everybody, look in my eyes. Hear me today. Maybe God is calling you to pull your head out. Too many people, they just deny reality. And I'm not saying that we don't fight. I'm not saying that you don't believe God. I'm not saying that you don't contend for the things that God has for you. But what I am saying is that if God has spoken clearly to you, then you need to accept what he says, even if you don't like it. And this is exactly what happened to Habakkuk. Notice this, verse 16. He said, I heard God's plan to use the Babylonians to destroy Israel. And my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. Everybody, I want you to hear this today. I want you to feel this. He says, my heart trembled. It pounded. My lips quivered. My legs shook when I realized that what God said was going to happen, even though I didn't like it. And what I love about Habakkuk is that he faced reality. He was a man that faced reality square in the eyes. And he said, you know what? This next season that I'm about to walk into, it's not going to be fun. In fact, a lot of innocent people are going to die. Maybe even some of my family members, maybe even myself. But even though I don't like this, even though I don't agree with this, I will still trust in the name of the Lord my God. I will still worship him with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. I'll give you an example of this. Admittedly, this is very minor, very minor. But I don't think that it's a shock to anybody here that, in case you're new around here, you need to know this as well. I don't think very highly of cats. Okay? Let me just tell you. Dogs are cool, cats drool. Okay? That's just a fact. You can email me, complain all you want. Doesn't change my opinion one bit. Okay? However, when I was growing up, I had a cat. Her name was Muffin. And I loved Muffin. Okay? So that makes me a cat hypocrite. Okay? So when Tatum and I started dating 27 years ago, she heard about Muffin. And she heard about Muffin, and so she thought I liked cats, and so she decided to buy me a black cat. And so I called the cat Blackie, okay? And Blackie stayed outside. She was an outdoor cat. So one night, I saw one of Satan's greatest cats, a bobcat, go running across the lawn. So the next morning when I got up to feed Blackie didn't show up. It was the first time in 4 months that she had not shown up for breakfast. So I pretty much ascertained that, Mr. Bobcat probably had a little breakfast snack that morning. So a couple days later, Tatum comes over to the house and she asked me, she said, hey, where's Blackie at? And I said, I don't know. And before you knew it, Tatum had me joining with her praying that little Blackie would come home. I mean, we called down heaven's angels to search to and fro throughout the entire earth and find little Blackie and bring Blackie home. She had me hanging up lost cat signs. And finally, one day I had to sit her down. It was a couple days after that. I'm like, hey, baby, I need to tell you something. She's like, what? I said, I don't think Blackie's coming home. She said, what do you mean? I told her the whole thing. You should have seen her face. She was crestfallen. I mean, she was so distraught knowing that the miracle that she was praying for was never going to happen. Now, some of you guys are wondering, why are you telling us this today, Chris? It's because this is a lot cheaper than therapy, all right? So there you go. Everybody, let me tell you something. Look at my eyes. It's not always going to work out. Sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't go the way that you want it to go. Sometimes that thing has already happened. In fact, I'll say it like this. Please hear this. For some of you, the cat's not coming home. It's really not. And it's in those moments that we have to be reminded and understand that faith isn't the ability to change your situation. Faith is trusting God, even when the situation doesn't change. That's what faith is. We're going to have to trust God. We're going to have to be there. We're going to have to do exactly what God says. So when you're in the dip, when you're walking through the calamity and the questions and the struggles and the confusion that is all around, we're going to do what? We're going to look back and remember what God has done. And then we're going to accept what God is doing, number 2. And then number 3, we're going to trust what God will do. And this is a principle that is found in probably some of the richest verses in this entire story of Habakkuk. And I want you to see this here. Chapter 3, verse number 17. He says, hey, God, I don't understand it. And I don't agree with it. In fact, the Babylonians should get what's coming to them, not us. But yet I will what? I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. I'm going to wait and I'm going to trust God. Though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes on the vine, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls. In other words, I'll say it like this. Although there are no visible signs and reasons for me to rejoice, yet I will what? I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. When Habakkuk had no visible sign to rejoice, he said, I will rejoice. Even though that the fig trees bear no blossoms, there are no buds, I will trust in God. I will rejoice. And I'll show you what this means for you in your life right now. So in other words, if you're in a marriage and you've made a covenant between God, heaven, and the angels, and you've looked up and you said, God, I'm going to put this marriage into your hand, and yet they don't keep their end of the bargain. They don't keep their word. You're still going to be somebody that says, I will trust in the Lord. When you have prayed for your kids and you've raised them right, and yet they're still making bad decisions, dangerous decisions, I'm still going to trust in the Lord. When you've prayed for that miracle in their body and they don't get better, in fact, they get worse, I will still trust in the Lord. I'm going to still trust in Him. When your house is on the market and it's been on there for weeks and weeks and months and nothing is happening and you're on the line for the whole thing, I'm going to still trust in the Lord. When finances are tight, you don't know how you're going to pay for things and eggs are $400 for a dozen, I'm going to still trust in the Lord. When God could, should, and would do something, but he doesn't, I'm going to still trust in God. You see, faith isn't built on what God does. It's anchored on who he is. Man, I want it with all my heart. I want you to have a chapter 3 level kind of faith. But I'm going to be really honest with you today. You're never going to get it. You'll never have that until you go through chapter 1. And you go through all the questions and the confusion and the wondering and the difficulties. You're never going to have chapter 3 level faith until you go through that difficulty. And you'll never have it until you go through chapter 2, where you are waiting on the promise to be fulfilled. Let me tell you something. God moves most in the dips of life. He moves most on your behalf in those moments, not on the mountaintops. The people that know him the best, those that have the greatest intimacy with him, it happened not when they were on some mountaintop experiencing all the success. It happened in the middle of the struggle. It happened when you realize that I've got nowhere else to lift my quivering hand up to but a great, mighty, awesome God. And Lord, I need you. I'll say it like this. I've been walking with God now for 33 years. And what I've discovered is that I've seen God's hand in my past too often to question his plan for my future. I look back and I see his hand. So oftentimes in my past when I see, God, you protected me here and you watched over me here. So as I see what God has done, how can I ever question his future that he has for me? And so what I want to do today is I want to read one last verse to you. And I felt yesterday while I was in prayer that the Lord told me, he said, I'm going to walk into this service. And so come on, I don't want you just to hear this. I want you to receive this, because the Lord is going to breathe fresh wind into your sails. It says in verse number 19, it says, God, I don't like what's happening. I don't understand all this. But the sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of deer, and he enables me to do what, everybody? Come on, say it out loud with me. He enables me to go on to new heights. He enables me to go to new levels. And I just declare this over you in Jesus' mighty name. Some of you are in the dip. Some of you are in the struggle. Some of you are facing calamities and questions that are all around. And I'm telling you that God has never left you. He's never forsaken you. He has never abandoned you. It's time for us to do the Habakkuk. And what does Habakkuk's name mean? It means to embrace. It means to wrestle with God. We're going to hold on to God with everything that we've got. And God promises that he will never let go of you. And as you hold on to him, we are going to cry out to him and we're going to ask him, God, do something new in our day. Renew this again in the moment that we live right now. Show yourself strong on our behalf. Oh, great God, we remember what you've done. Now do it again. Take us to new levels, new platforms, new influence, new business deals, new relationships, new doors of opportunity in Jesus' mighty name, because God is still good. And the people of God here today, come on, say amen and amen.